maps. One. Okay, here's the second one. I had a lot of these left. Everybody has two maps? Oh, okay. Here's one.
That's the one I have.
That's the one you have. You need the other one. Are there any more of the first map? Oh, good. Thanks. Great.
Anyone need the second
For D,
map?
yeah. That's the first. That's the first map. Yep. Those two. Yep. Well, welcome back. Yes. Oh, thank you. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Val. Good. What I hope to do today is to bring us up to date really quickly, and some of the first part of this I'm going to be talking a lot and be referring to the maps that you have. And also on this newsprint, I put some dates, which I've decided my magic marker is probably as old as I am. And so it's a little grayer than it should be, so than it was before. But what I'd like to talk about is movement into from the time of the resurrection of Jesus, when things began just exploding throughout the Middle East, quietly, by and large, because of Jesus. The news about Jesus spread to Samaria. It spread the centurion in Caesarea, the governors and kings of Palestine at that point, gathered, and they got Paul together and to listen to him in Caesarea and out to Antioch, and it began moving up into Greece and kind of all around. So nothing in terms of our faith stood still after the resurrection. In fact, things exploded. It just really began going everywhere, and the world actually began to change. But the truth about the Holy Land, if you remember the maps that we've seen there, is that the people of that land still weren't in charge of their own life. That the Roman occupation intensified and so forth, and then the Byzantine Empire, when the Roman Empire split, and the eastern end exercised jurisdiction over what we call the Holy Land. And then after them, and I'm really compressing hundreds of years now, the Ottoman Empire came back and they controlled that whole land. But the people of the land did not have any jurisdiction over their own life until the 20th century began to change things radically. The other thing that happened was that the Jewish population became dispersed, kind of out throughout the Middle East and up into Europe and into Africa and over to India and so forth. And so that the Jewish people of Jewish faith had no homeland that they could call their own, certainly in terms of history and faith and hope and so forth. Yeah, if I forget you, O Jerusalem, but they had no place. Anne and I were talking the other day, and she compared the Hebrew people, the Jews, as kind of like the Roma in Europe. They went from place to place. They were always outcasts, often brutally persecuted, and had no homeland. And so that was the situation that pertained up until the 20th century. And in 1897 is the date normally given for what I guess I'm going to call the birth of Zionism. And it was through the writing of particularly of Theodor Herzl, who was an Austrian Jew, and he published a book looking at the possibility, probability, the must-ability of having a homeland for the Jewish people. Now, this was not a new idea. Apparently, even President John Adams, at the beginning of our country, thought that there should be a Jewish national homeland. And there are all sorts of proposals for where that should be. I think Wisconsin was one of them, I'm not sure. But there are all sorts of proposals and so forth. Herzl really wrote, and in his writings, in his leadership, there emerged the drive, if you will, for Zion, for Zionism. And it would be in the land of the Scriptures and the Bible. That was the only place that the Jewish homeland could possibly be. And so the vision was for the ingathering of the diaspora, of the exiles, into this place. And it began happening surreptitiously, but with organization as the years went on into the 2000s. The vision was for a social utopia, a chance to build a whole new way of living together, because there was no hereditary monarchy, there was no this, there was no that. They had a chance to put something together that would be built on absolute equality. Men and women and so forth would be there. Any person who wanted to come to that homeland who is Jewish could come. There were no holds barred. A number of people, particularly from Eastern Europe, moved in, and Russia, moved into the land, and many took Hebrew names. Remember David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel? He came from Poland, had a Polish name. He kept David, of course, and then Ben-Gurion, the son of Gurion, they took Hebrew names. They began to purchase land from Arab owners who were living there, and invented two kinds of communities that were set up, particularly about mid-20th century. And one is called a kibbutz, where everything is held absolutely in common, that there is not individual property, homes, so forth. Childcare was all communal, dining and eating or communal, work relationships or community. Leadership was always going to be revolved around, and also for defense. And then a moshav, which was a little bit like a kibbutz, but where you could have private property and private ownership within the shared community. So this began a movement of Jews back into the land that we call today Israel. World War I was significant because of the lands were held by the Ottomans, and in that World War, the countries of Europe particularly banded together and to conquer the Ottoman Empire, which had moved up as far as Austria and so forth. It was a hugely extensive empire, but sort of corrupt and rickety and falling apart and all sorts of things like that. So what happened was the countries of Europe began deciding how this land would be divided up without any reference to who was living there. It was all being decided pretty much in Europe. And there was an initial agreement, and then the Balfour Declaration from England, that there was an understanding that eventually there would be a Jewish homeland in what we now call Israel, in the Levant. So World War I went on, and Jerusalem was captured by Sir Edmund Allenby, whose name survives in the Allenby Bridge across the Jordan River. That's the most used crossing, which is a bunch of planks and a rickety bus and whatever. This is the time of Lawrence of Arabia, and Lawrence went out on his own, pretty much, out of Egypt, and rallied Arab tribes and promised them that they would have a say in the allocation of these lands. And it turns out that they didn't. The big council in Damascus and so forth, they didn't. And frankly, they couldn't, because Arab tribes are Arab tribes, and they're not nations, and there's no agreement on leadership, and never has been, and so forth. Anyway, so yes.
Could I just say that the Balfour Declaration, which was a declaration by an aristocratic lord in England.
Right.
It had no legal
Right.
force. And in addition to stating that there should be a Jewish homeland in Palestine, it also said that the rights of the other inhabitants, meaning the Arab inhabitants, would not be disturbed.
Right.
So most people forget about that last line.
That's very true.
No force of law.
No, absolutely not, no. But it had huge suasion among a whole bunches of people. So that in 1920, the land was, after World War I, the land was divided up and allocations were made, and they are on this first map, the 1920 allocations. And Lebanon and Syria were allocated under the protection of, there's another map here too, under the protection of France. The area that is in blue, that corresponds roughly to modern-day Israel, and the stripes was allocated to England, Great Britain. And during that time, the British also had a protectorate presence in Egypt. And it was from that military presence in Egypt that Lawrence of Arabia set out and did his stuff, and so forth, so forth, so forth. So that the land was allocated to these European countries. And the Palestinian mandate to Great Britain, particularly in this whole area that's shown by the blue and the striped area, was to set up viable government. And eventually, viable government, and eventually to be able to turn over the responsibilities, I think, was hopefully a thing. Well, what Great Britain did was they took the Jordan River, which you can see running down, and turned the striped area over to Arab families who set up a jurisdiction based in Amman, Jordan. And that became the Hashemite kingdom eventually, and still is to this day. And then, but they stayed as the occupying mandate force in the area that we now know basically as Israel, and tried to work different agreements among the landowners and the peoples to arrive at a way to govern this land, which has been not terribly governable since the beginning of time. So what happened was there began to be revolts, began to be armed conflicts between Arabs and Jews who were moving in and so forth. The League of Nations approved this mandate in 1922, and then World War II broke out. And with the Nazi aggression in Europe and the Russian pogroms, huge numbers of people began coming either furtively or directly into the land of Palestine. And eventually, it turns out that 1/3 of the population in Palestine was Jewish by the time that the war ended. And there was a tug between London and the government and the military occupation. The London government was I've forgotten right now which one was which side, but I think the British were trying to kind of work some stuff more with an Arab presence, and the London government was not, and so they were not functioning well. One of the options was partition and forcible relocation. Divide the place up, make all the Jews move to one place, make all the Arabs move to another place. That wasn't going to work. There were riots. 1937, the British imposed martial law. 1948, the United Nations resolution created the State of Israel. And that's on the second map that you have. That's a little more colorful than the first. So the division of Palestine that was set up by the General Assembly of the UN in 1947, the green area is set up for a Jewish state. The kind of orangish area is set up as an Arab state. And then you see in Jerusalem, it's a pink area, and that was to be an international city. Well, from the beginning, if you can, looking at the map, can you see how this is absolutely unworkable? I mean, absolutely unworkable. I'm sorry? I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, sure. I didn't realize you didn't have it. So what happened with the declaration in 1948, and have you ever seen the movie Exodus? Yeah, well, that's kind of about this time, and it's a very strange movie, but it you know. Oh yeah, well. Yeah, absolutely right. But it does raise some of the issues that were being faced at that time, where Jews and Arabs who wanted to live with peaceful coexistence in some kind of cooperative way. What happened was that the Arab League decided kind of the hell with this and initiated a war and began attacking and so forth from areas that they controlled. Then as the consequence of that, there was a new balance of power. There were greatly extended corridors and so forth of common land for the new Israel. And a number of Arabs fled and were told that, you know, they're going to come and they're going to kill you all and so forth. And so they fled. And Jordan exercised dominion, if you will, over the part of the land that is on the labeled here Judea and Samaria. It was exercised, and in fact had more or less control in Jerusalem too, as it turned out. And that area became known as the West Bank. And Jordan originally was called Transjordan, which meant it was the east of the Jordan River. And the West Bank refers to the west bank of the Jordan River and Jordan also extended instant citizenship to all Arabs who wanted that. And the result is that approximately 67% or more of Jordanians are now Palestinians. So Jordan is in a very funny situation where the majority of its population is in fact not Jordanian as a result of that. Yes? No, I'm trying to kind of, go ahead, please. No, please. Go ahead. I'm not trying to answer everything. Go ahead, please. Right, no country.
Many tried to return to their own homes, but all their homes had been confiscated. Anti-Semitism had been stimulated by the war, and these were homeless people. And by underground means, they began to flood into what was still being called Palestine.
Thank you. Thank you, and I appreciate it. Yeah, very much appreciated. Thank you. So that she brings us right up to the time of the '67 war called the Six-Day War. It was a pan-Arab effort, Egypt and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon, all those kinds of things. And the idea was that they were going to take back Palestine, the Pan-Arab League. And what happened as a result of this surprise huge attack was the resilience and the strength of the Israeli military was unbelievable, even some of their own people. And so what happened was that the Israelis took over all of East Jerusalem, and all of East Jerusalem, which includes the Old City, in areas of north of Jerusalem and so forth. They took over all of the West Bank to the Jordan River. They conquered Gaza, which was sort of under an Egyptian sort of protectorate, although the Egyptians, I don't think, really wanted it. They took over the Golan Heights from Syria. They conquered the entire Sinai Peninsula right down to the Suez Canal and crossed the Suez Canal, actually. So in 6 days, pow, the whole world was changed in terms of control of territory and also world opinion. Now, after that, Israel gave back a lot of that territory. They gave back the Golan Heights. They gave back most of the Sinai and so forth. But they kept the West Bank. They kept Jerusalem and East Jerusalem and control over Gaza. 1973, the Yom Kippur War. This was absolutely unprecedented, although apparently the king of Jordan might have made a secret trip to Jerusalem to alert that this was going to happen. Yom Kippur, the holiest day of year for Jews, the Arabs launched an attack. And it's interesting in terms of where we are right today, it was also during the Muslim month of Ramadan for fasting. So they both coincided as they are this particular year. And so the Israelis recaptured the Golan Heights and the Sinai. Have given back most of the Sinai, but have certainly kept the Golan Heights. So all sorts of efforts were made to kind of work this through. The Palestinian Authority began to be formed. The Oslo Accords, remember, all that kind of thing. And then in the 1980s, with the occupation and the Intifada, the informal uprising, the general strikes. When I was there during part of the Intifada, the shops were closed, the city was absolutely shuttered down all across the Arab areas. Jewish expansion began into the occupied territories. The so-called settlers began putting little villages on hilltops around and so forth. And at first they were really very, very primitive, but they began to be reinforced, began being built, and now, today, they're all over the place. I mean, kind of like growths, on mountaintops and so forth. Highways began to be built through the West Bank, and then finally, in the 2000, walls began to be constructed. It would make President Trump very happy to see what the Israelis did. The walls are absolutely incredible. Cutting off farmers from lands, Arab farmers from lands, roads that are meant exclusively for Israelis to use to get back and forth from the settlements down to Jerusalem and back again. Arabs have to take all kind of back roads, that sort of thing. So, well, I'm going to get to that in a minute. Okay, citizenship is a tricky question on a number of fronts, yeah, I will get there. Thanks for the question. So today, in terms of the land, Israel has developed agriculture unbelievably. Along the Shephelah, the plain near the coast, even the Jordan Valley is now, since I've seen it, is all now farms. It's unbelievable with irrigation. The desert can bloom. Israel has become very much a high-tech nation. Lots of technology is being developed. Israel is a nuclear power and has been for decades. It's one of the worst kept secrets of Israel, is that they have nuclear energy and nuclear power, and not quite sure indeed what else. Medicine, great advances in medicine. Manufacturing, a lot of consumer products are made in Israel and come over here, particularly personal care products I've seen. It's interesting. And tourism, of course, is just huge. So it's a thoroughly developing country, state at this point in all sorts of ways. In terms of what was called Palestine, or what some people still call Palestine, the occupied West Bank is still occupied. There's military presence. We've been reading a lot lately about terrorist activities, both from the settlers and from Arabs against each other, and the military coming in. And the Israeli military is hugely powerful. And I mean, if I were to go out and cause something of a terrorist incident with Israelis, my family's homes would be demolished. Everything, it's just huge, hugely. It's occupied territory. Israel has annexed East Jerusalem, so that's now considered. It's kind of like a little bit with the annexation of parts of Ukraine, in a sense. You know, it's not actually part of, but it's more than just occupied. So, in terms of East Jerusalem, where our church's center is and so forth, has been annexed. And also the Golan Heights up by Syria has been annexed. And that was partly because Syria used the heights as a fantastic site to bombard northern Israel all the time with military fire and so forth. So, coming along. So in answer, kind of getting to your questions, I'm going to try to do something here which is impossible, which is to talk about the faiths and some ethnicity concerns. The three Abrahamic faiths, as we identify them, all have Jerusalem as a faith center. So all three Abrahamic faiths have Jerusalem as a faith center. For the Jewish faith, Jerusalem was the site of the temple of God, the house of God. And we use that in our terms, in our hymns, our psalms, and so forth. Where God had a house there. I've been told not to say that God lived there because God's all over, but God had a house there, if you will, where people could go, particularly for worship. And we saw the picture of the reconstruction of the temple, you know, facing east, because that was the direction from which the Messiah will come, the day spring, and so forth. And among the Jewish folk, there are a number of different groups, and I'm not going to be able to do this really accurately because there are so many factions and ins and outs and so forth. I will just tell you, I can't begin. The ultra-Orthodox are the Hasidim and the Haredim. They are mostly from Eastern Europe. They're identified by the long black clothing that the men wear and the hats kind of perched on their heads covered. The women always have their heads covered or wear a wig. Very, 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 very conservative. Many are messianic, looking for the Messiah to come. Some don't think Israel should exist because Israel can't be reestablished until the Messiah comes. So what is this thing called the State of Israel? The men, by and large, are not employed, but some are now. But their job is to study Scripture, Torah, Mishnah, and so forth. And so they participate in the yeshivas, in the schools. Some are Kabbalists, and we'll see a Kabbalist synagogue when I do get to some pictures up in North. Then there are conservative or Orthodox, well, not what we would call here in the US, but Orthodox Jews, and more adapted to modern life, driving cars, all kinds of things, and not that others don't. But, and for me at least, often identified by wearing the kapot, the men wearing the head covering for humility in the presence of God. A number of the Orthodox are militant, and a number of them are driving force between the settlements up and around in the West Bank particularly. By the way, a lot of this is financed with money that comes from this country, I just want to say. A lot of what's happening in terms of this spread. And Reform Jews, don't even mention it in Israel. You know, the rabbis certainly don't accept that. 45% of Jews in Israel claim to be secular, to have no faith at all, in the sense of the traditions, observing, you know, holy days, synagogues, and so forth like that. So it's a huge number of Jews there are secular. I think a lot of the original kibbutzim and so forth were secular, and they were designed to breed Jewish men and women and boys and girls to be strong and to be self-sufficient and not to depend upon the whims of others and other people of the country. It reminds me a little bit of the founding of Camp Washington, which was originally founded to beef people up to go fight in World War I. It became agriculture and so forth. And boys were taken to Camp Washington to put muscle on them and harden them up because of the lives they had led. A lot of that is the same kind of thing behind originally the establishment of kibbutzim. There are two chief rabbis, one Sephardic, and that's for Jews who were in the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, and across Africa, and maybe even over into India. And the other is Ashkenazi, chief rabbi, who represents primarily the European Jewry and primarily American, I guess, too, probably. But so there are two chief rabbis who share religious authority over Jews, which is intertwined with state authority. There's no separation on a lot of matters. Who becomes a Jew? I mean, who can be a resident? If a rabbi oversees a conversion, the chief rabbis and their council have to determine that that really, really, really did happen, and it's really, really, really tough. The Center for Jewish Life, of course, is in Jerusalem, is the site of the temple, and we saw the Wailing Wall, the Western Wall, which is as near as Orthodox Jews are allowed to get to the Temple Mount because of the fear of stepping inadvertently on the side of the Holy of Holies up there. It's also the nearest they get because the Temple Mount has been until recently controlled by Arabs, by Muslims, whose buildings dominate the site up there. But let's move to Christian next. Jewish inhabitants of Israel are 73.6% of the country, almost 3/4 of the country. Christians, 1.9% of the country at this point, because many, 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 many have left. And there are a whole bunch of different groups here: Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian. There are two, we'll see in a few minutes, there are two Russian Orthodox churches. The beautiful church we saw on the Mount of Olives, that's white Russian Orthodox. There's another one in West Jerusalem that's Red Russian Orthodox Church, if you will, the Patriarchate of Moscow. The ones on the St. Mary Magdalene are not only looking for the return of Christ, they're looking for the return of the Tsar. I mean, you know, they're kind of, and so there are two Russian Orthodox churches there. Romanian Orthodox Church. The Romanians provide priests for the White Russian Church because they don't have any. There's also the Oriental Orthodox Church. These Syrians, Armenians, Ethiopians, Coptics, and so forth. And we'll take a look at least the entrance to the Ethiopian Patriarchate, the Coptic, rather. The Ethiopians live in mud huts up on the roof of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They have a whole community up there. And I'd love to tell you more about that, but that's for another time. And then, in addition to the Orthodox, there's the Latin churches, as they're called. Roman Catholic, huge influence. The Franciscans have custody of a number of the Christian sites all through Israel. Then there's the Eastern Catholic, the Melkites, the Greek Catholics, the Armenian Catholics, the Syriac Catholics, the Chaldean Catholics, and the Maronites. These are all uniate. They're in communion with the Pope. So they're not Orthodox. They're Catholic churches. And the Greek Catholic Church in Jerusalem is one of the most beautifully decorated churches I've ever seen in the world. The whole Bible is painted on the walls and the pillars and the roofs, and it's just unbelievable. Anglican Church, the Diocese of Jerusalem. I think what I'd like to do is turn this on now and show you a couple pictures and get going. You okay? Yes, we're going to get to that. Good.
Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine.
Right. Thanks. Good. Okay. We'll get it in. We're going to spend some time with our church there. This is the Red Russian Church, and in West Jerusalem, a little less ornate than the one we saw on the Mount of Olives. This is the entrance to the a Coptic church. It's in a niche up above and alongside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I never got inside that. I never went inside that. This is the entrance to the Armenian church. Can I get this a little higher? No, that's as high as it's going to go. Let me just see if I can raise this a little bit. Is that better? Yeah. That's the entrance to St. James Armenian Church. The Armenian quarter in the Old City is different from the rest of the Old City. Everything is turned inward. There are no doors, there are no windows, it's all inside. Wonderful. You can see the carpet hangs down over the entrance door, and the doors are open. So when you go in, there are services going on, you lift the edge of the carpet and you sneak in. It's very effective. I wish we could kind of do some of that here. And I had a chance to have an individual meeting with the patriarch of the Armenian church, but that's the story for another time. Inside the Old City also, this is a kind of difficult slide, is this very English-looking church, this George Hall, for those of you who may remember him as a priest. This is one of the two Anglican churches in Jerusalem. This one's inside the Old City, and it was set up by evangelical Anglicans, particularly to reach out for the conversion of Jews. So there's a lot of Hebrew in the church. It's very simple and very plain. It still has that mission to today. But you need to know that there is a law in Israel that forbids evangelistic conversions. You cannot go out in the street of Jerusalem and begin preaching for Jesus, or preaching for Mohammed, or trying to convince people to become Jewish. That evangelism among the faiths is outlawed in the state. I think it's one way to keep some peace there. But this was from a previous time, this church, and so it sits, and how much of a congregation it has, I don't know. On the north side, outside the Old City, in East Jerusalem, is the Anglican compound, and this is our bishops, the Bishop of Jerusalem and the Diocese of Jerusalem in the Middle East. So a nice courtyard there, beautiful little parking area. On the right-hand side is the bishop's residence over here. This is where the bishop lives, and a tower, freestanding tower in the back, and the cloisters and the cathedral behind it. And off to the left over here, we'll see in a minute, a beautiful guest house. So when you go, I really encourage you to think about staying there. The Diocese of Jerusalem and the Middle East does include, as Kate says, Jordan, Palestine, which they call, Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. About 7,000 members of the extended diocese, 28 congregations. Impossible almost for the bishop to get to some of these because of border crossings. You can imagine going back and forth how difficult it can be. 30 institutions, the major ministry of the Episcopal Church of the Diocese of Jerusalem, the Middle East, is through institutions that it supports and has founded and supports. There are schools in Ramallah. We're going to look at two of them, in Nazareth and in Amman, Jordan, where Kate and I have visited at the Schneller School. There's an eye disease hospital. There are general hospitals, including one in Nablus and one in Gaza. There are guest houses, and there's also the college, St. George's College, which any one of us can go to, where I spent a month to take courses in Bible and history. It's a vital congregation, but it's lost a tremendous number of members. There are gardens outside the guest house. Beautiful place to stay. I recommend it highly. It's 3-star, maybe not 4-star or 5-star, but oh, you can't see it. This is the chancel. It's, you know, look, chairs, altar, apse, you know how it goes. Pulpit on the right, yeah. And this is the baptistry. Oh, we can't really see it well. The cover on the baptismal font here reaches almost to the ceiling and is suspended on a chain, which makes it very English. And then there's an immersion baptistry also. So the 3 steps down, which is like the Byzantines. And the side chapel, which is my daily Eucharist, and I've had the privilege of presiding there at least twice. So very simple Eucharist, beautifully done. The corridors in the hospice, and the dining room of the hospice of the St. George's. And across the street and down a little bit is the East Jerusalem YMCA. Again, hotel, restaurants, physical facilities like a Y would be here, but also job training programs for Arabs. This is the Arab institution, Christian institution. They run a training center outside Jericho where all sorts of skills are taught, and leatherworking and metalworking and other kinds of things. I worked with them for 2 weeks and rewrote some of their historical documents and bringing them up to date for publication, and also was able to tour their extensive work there. Originally they were in West Jerusalem with the partition. They had to start all over again in East Jerusalem. In Ramallah, which is only about 10 miles north of Jerusalem, Ram is the heights, heights of Allah. Ramallah is the capital of the Palestinian Authority, such as it is at this point, in the West Bank. It's the largest city in the West Bank, and we have 2 schools there, the Evangelical School, and it's modern buildings. It's a lovely place. It's for girls, and it's funded mostly by European Christians. Obviously the American Friends of the Episcopal Diocese provide funding for it also. But there's some kids in the classroom. I'm sorry, these are so hard to see. The teacher, and the kids learn English. The school is open to anybody of any faith whatsoever. And the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem sees itself as a broker for peace, so that children coming to this school will learn about each other and how to live together without guns and war. This is one of the great goals and dreams of the Episcopal Church. Well, yeah, except often the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Church, has been a kind of arm, if you will, of colonialism, and that has not been to bring people together. So, but this is the particular ministry that they clearly have found. Their hospitals are open to anybody of any faith, and they're known for this. Even in the councils in Jerusalem, the Anglican Episcopalians are known as the ones who are working to bring people together across faith lines. Praise God, you know. Dormitory for the girls. And then the Evangelical Home and School is also in Ramallah, and this is for boys. and lively kids. So we're going to leave them there. And just to say that the offerings of Trinity Church on Ash Wednesday, Palm Sunday, and Good Friday, and Easter, the release offerings will all be sent to there. Are you going to speak?
We have this, well, not the only reason is I probably made this 10 years ago, and you're probably saying,
Loud.
squares. These are places that our church has given donations to. So, Ramallah, you were just talking about Ramallah, we gave to one of those schools. The interesting thing, and I know this is an aside, but Jerusalem's down here, and this year they're giving funds to the Princess Basma School. How do you say it? What is Princess Basma? Well, the school is a school for the handicapped, and it was funded by Princess Basma, who is the sister of the former King Hussein, who died of cancer. And in the West Bank was originally a Jordanian territory. So she was Jordanian and established the school in Jordanian territory, but then in the 67 war, that became the West Bank. So that kind of, then the name is still there, Princess Basma, she's still fine. So that's why all this pretty pink squares. I just wanted to tell you about Princess Basma.
Thank you.
For the longest time, I didn't know who she was, and I said, who is she?
Just to say that Kate has traveled extensively, several times, even over 4 times, and twice with the American Friends, and deep into the West Bank. She has been in Gaza. She has seen what it is to get in Gaza and get back out again. Yeah, and also it's through her that we got to the Schneller School in Amman, Jordan, so she's yeah. So. Okay, let's move. In terms of other Christians, Lutherans are there. They've got a beautiful, beautiful church in the old city because one of the Kaisers, in fact, had the Jaffa Gate torn down so he could get his carriage in at one point, so forth. Mennonites are active there. The purple stole you may have seen me wearing when I was presiding here is needlepoint through a Mennonite mission and with Arab women. And then evangelical Christians. Evangelical Christians are people who are committed politically to the recreation of through the state of Israel, which many believe has to be established before Christ will return. So evangelical Christians from this country are huge financial supporters of the movement that moves into the West Bank and all that other kind of thing, because the land to be committed, and they are looking for the recreation of the temple. So they do not have a land presence there, but they have tours, they have money, and they have politics, and along with the Haredim at the Western Wall, who are looking for the return of the Messiah, so are the evangelical Christians. They're messianic, definitely, in terms of their focus. Can you? Well, some think it has to be established. So all the lands have to be reclaimed, Judea and Samaria. It has to be reconstituted for it to happen. Others believe it should go away, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, there are different beliefs, I think. So finally, the third Abrahamic faith is Muslim. There's Sunni Muslims, by and large, in Israel and the West Bank. 18.1% of Israel's population. Remember, for population, we're not including the West Bank and or Gaza. We're including what Israel has annexed or is absolutely in control of. Because, and we're going to get to voting at the very end here. So there's Druze. They are not Muslim, they are not Christian, they are not Jewish, they are kind of their own thing. And They are very inward learning, don't participate in politics. 1.6% of the population. There are 840 Samaritans, I understand, left. And also, in terms of the, we're going to go north up to the port of Haifa, which is Israel's only port. Sorry, it was so cloudy that day. But in Haifa is the center of the Baha'i faith. And their grounds are beautifully kept, and the center worship temple, if you will, for Baha'i is located in Israel, in Haifa. And we have Baha'i living here in our midst, and a number of whom were working with the Congolese family who came over, our Baha'i. So I'm going to take some privilege here and share with you two experiences I had that help illustrate a little bit about the modern situation in Israel. We're looking at the city of Safat, or Safed in Arabic, which is in the Upper Galilee in northern Israel, from a parking area up through a graveyard up to the city on the heights. It's an ultra-Orthodox city. It was hard fought over during the time of the unrest. The memorial to children who were killed in the fighting at the cemetery. This staircase in the center of Safat was originally a dividing no man's zone between an Arab side and a Jewish side. And it became, again, the fighting and street-to-street fighting there was just awful and horrible. It was settled particularly by Jews from Spain and Portugal who developed a theology, if you will, of deep mysticism, Jewish mysticism, experience of God, numerology, what Christians would call Gnostic teachings, very, very much turned in on themselves. And this became, from the early Middle Ages on, the center of Kabbalistic Jewish mysticism. The reason for going here is that a colleague of mine in Waterbury, Rabbi Joseph Heckelman, who is rabbi of Bethel Synagogue in Waterbury, who's the one who got one of us to go to Israel in the first place, made his aliyah, remember that term, his homecoming to Jerusalem. And he's a conservative rabbi, and he chose this city, which is ultra-Orthodox, to try to establish a Jewish conservative presence. This is his home. He and Zippy moved here. They gave up everything that they had here. They moved to Israel, supported, I think, by Jewish folks here, and particularly from Waterbury. And so he opened his home as a synagogue, and the community kind of closed in on him. We spent two different times. We had a chance to visit with Joe, and he said, you know, watch every move I make. If I don't go anywhere near driving my car on the Sabbath, they're always watching. And conservative American Judaism doesn't really have a toehold much in Israel at all. And so he was going to try to establish something brand new there. But he took Kate and me around we went to a Maronite community, of places we never would have gone otherwise. In Safat, there are ultra-Orthodox synagogues, and our guide on the left, this is from another trip, took us inside and explained a little bit about the tradition of argumentation and in scriptural study. And while we were in the synagogue, he took us to what we could see maybe as prayer desks, but a little higher. And he explained that in the synagogue, men are paired up with a partner for disputation for life. And you hope you get a good one, you know. And you're paired up for life, and in the study, the debate on Torah, Mishnah goes back and forth, and these prayer desks rock. Actually, they have curlers underneath them, and they rock back and forth, so that as you're making your point, you lean in against the other person and make your point, and so forth, and then he pushes back against you to make maybe a clarifying point or a different point. And so that's how Scripture is studied back and forth. That's Elmer Odell from Manchester. Bless his soul, long departed. But, and so we had some time inside the synagogue to understand some more about the ultra-Orthodox. So there's a kind of two parts of Judaism sort of running into each other in this very ancient traditional city. We're now going to go, British military control tower from the 1930s. You can see how serious this was in terms of the riots that were going on. So this is not Israeli, this is British. We're going out to the coast and going further north. We're going to go up further north to the most northwest corner of Israel at this point. And for another experience, we're going to stop at the Lebanese border. Now this is 1979. The fence is the border. It was called the Good Fence in those days. However, in Kiryat Shimona, which is the nearest big town, every apartment has a safe room, which is completely impermeable to machine gun fire, and underground bunkers for shelling and so forth. They're right near the border. And so, but this is called the Good Fence because people went back and forth through it, and we saw that happening. And, there's no very big border guard here. On the Lebanese side, there are cars parked, and people would come across and buy things in Israel and take it back to Lebanon or come for work or so forth. I don't think the border probably is quite this unsecure at this point with Hezbollah and everything. Yeah, right. So in those days, trenches dug, barbed wire for defense, for crossing the border. What we're going to do is go into Kibbutz Matsuva, which is also right along the border. It was established in 1940. It's a secular kibbutz dedicated primarily to agriculture. They have huge banana fields and so forth. And also they began manufacturing textile thread, although they don't do that any longer. So this is a kibbutz that is not religious at all. I went there to visit a friend of ours, a member of our parish, Jamie Dawson, who had been called in her life to convert to Judaism. So she was there under what's called Ulpan, which is a time when young people, she was 19 I think at that point, can go and for 5 months live in the kibbutz, learn Hebrew, learn Judaism, and so forth, hopefully at least to be educated in Judaism historically and religiously, and perhaps, if necessary, or led to conversion. And that was Jamie's reason for going there. So I took a car, and I went up there for a Sabbath weekend. And I arrived on Friday, and these are some of the older parts of the kibbutz with the communal play area. The children are all raised in a communal setting, and so forth, and fed and cared for during the day, returned to families at night, whatever, and so forth. The community center, you can see the kibbutz has prospered. It was a large community center with a communal dining hall for all meals. There were constant patrols along the perimeters of the kibbutz because of the border fence and the potential of invasion and getting forth. Some of the newer housing in the kibbutz. Here's the thread manufacturing. This is the thread mill, where they're spinning cotton into thread or cotton rope. There she is, working the machines. These pictures actually were taken by her parents, not by me. I did not get inside the thread mill. Everybody in the kibbutz has to work. Everybody has to work. Lovely outdoor patios for recreation, swimming area, volleyball court, whatever. So before we get there, I'm going to go back that one slide. A few more things about the kibbutz. Over Shabbat, for the Friday night dinner, everybody got dressed up. Now, normally it was cut-off jeans, T-shirts, machetes to go out and harvest the bananas off the trees and so forth. But everybody dressed for dinner. There was wine on the tables and tablecloths. I mean, tablecloths, imagine. But no religious service whatsoever. Now, a few of the youngsters in the Opan decided they wanted to have a kind of made up on their own Shabbat service. So I went with them down into a bomb shelter, a tax shelter. 8 of us were down there all together. And there was a sort of mixture of whatever the kids could kind of put together. And Jamie read from 1 Corinthians. It was just very, very, very odd. And then we went out after dinner, and people gathered out in a large building, sort of storage area was open up, and a 2-piece band with a singer appeared, and the words across the top of the building were Jailhouse Rock. And they're singing, and there was dancing, which was quite exhibitionist, I might say, and cigarettes and booze, and that was Sabbath. That was the Sabbath. I mean, they were going to stay, the kids were going to stay up at least till midnight. I think I went to bed. I just couldn't get up. But I got talking with some of the kids about it, and the kids are kept separate a little bit. But they're not Sabra, which is they're not native born. But many of them were sent there by their families. And I would say, just my own valuation, quite spoiled, frankly, and not liking it all. But they said what they found about kibbutz living was there was no chance for real personal growth. I mean, you're going to cut bananas all your life. You're going to do that all your life. That the community being self-contained, as one person said, everything you want is here. Everything you want, food, clothing, work, recreation, everything you want. But the communities are absolutely ingrown, and one of the heights of interchange in the community was gossip. It just was riddled with gossip, they said. And finally, one of the youngsters said, "It's so boring here. It's just so boring." Yeah. Well, no, they meant it. 19, 18, 20, somewhere in that area, yeah, somewhere in that area, right. But it was like being in a bubble. So let me finish. I know I'm over my time with some stuff about politics. Whoops, sorry. This is a sculpture outside the Knesset building in Jerusalem, and it's which is the problem. I'm going to get to that, Jared. And the Knesset is the parliament. It describes the agony the Jews have experienced over the years, absolute agony. So in terms of politics, few things. Israel has no constitution. We have a constitution. Written constitution, no written constitution. Okay. The Knesset is the National Assembly. It meets in Jerusalem. It's unicameral. We have a bicameral legislation. They have one body, legislative body. When you go to vote as a citizen, you don't ever vote for a candidate. You vote for a party. And depending upon the distribution of votes among the parties, if a party garners 3.5% or more of the general vote, it can be apportioned seats in the Knesset, which is about 120 members, I think. So there's no such thing as representation, regional representation. There is no such thing as direct representation. Everything is done through party, what one of my sources called factions. They're not political parties in the sense quite as we, although they function that way. Currently, there are about 10 factions seated in the Knesset. One of them is Arab. So I think the Arab faction has maybe 5 or 6 seats. And among the Israeli Arabs, there often has been a reluctance to participate and to vote because it gives legitimacy to the state of Israel's presence. But more and more, I think Arabs are beginning to vote which is going to really be important for. Now, the president of the state of Israel is chosen by the Knesset. And then the president goes and approaches people in the different factions or parties about who could be prime minister. And if there's a sense, and I'm oversimplifying this, I know there's much more detail, that one party is larger or has a better chance of building a coalition with the other parties, that party will be encouraged to appoint a candidate for prime minister, which the Knesset then will elect. And that's how Netanyahu was elected back to be prime minister of Israel. President has really limited authority. Prime minister of Israel, even though he's under indictment and so forth. The Knesset can recall the president and can recall the prime minister by vote. And the prime minister can dissolve the Knesset. I mean, it's how it works, I'm not quite sure. And there are two great big, huge issues. Obviously, we've both mentioned them here. The settlements that are increasing in spite of an official saying that they're not going to increase and so forth. And the second is the move by Netanyahu to weaken the judiciary. So you can see how little check and balance there is between the executive and the legislative. And now there's a move to weaken the judiciary. And that's why these tens of thousands of people have taken to the streets, because the Knesset isn't really answerable, except every once in a while when there's a vote for a new Knesset. And even the military has now said to Netanyahu, you cannot do this. And since there's compulsory military service for every Israeli, except for some of the ultra-Orthodox who are exempted, men and women, compulsory military service. The military is the great leveler, if you will, if there is one, within the culture. And the Knesset is just held as being kind of corrupt, and the military is held in much higher esteem. So it's very interesting how this is going to play out in the near future, how it continues. This is not doing it justice. Right? This is my favorite photograph, and I want to end with this, because it's a flower that's growing up in the West Bank out of the middle of a bunch of rocks. And it's an impossible growth. And the future of all of this, it may seem like it's impossible. You know, it's just so tied up and regular. So my hope is, like a flower growing in the wilderness, that somehow there can be an emergence of a new way for Israel, Jews, Arabs, Christians, whoever, whatever, Muslims, whoever. So to end with a few verses from Psalm 122. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Peace be within your walls, and security be within your towers. And for the sake of my relatives and friends, I will say, peace be with you. And for the sake of the house of the Lord, our God, I will seek your good in my heart. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. I'm happy to stay, to talk further.